to the 6th episode of the Pirate Rugby Pod. This week, we welcome our first ever guest to the pod. Nye and Chris joined us from the Dream Team Rugby. How are we, lads?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good, just having us.
Great to have you on. So, if this is your first episode, you can come here every week to get the latest on Tier 2 rugby, major rugby news, broadcast updates, as well as a closer look at a different topic each episode. If you like the sound of that, YouTube viewers, please hit the like button, subscribe and share. Spotify listeners, please leave us a review and a lovely comment if you feel like it.
If you want even more from the Pirate Rugby, you can follow us on Twitter. We post on all the obscure games that happen across the weekend that nobody knows is happening. Or you can head over to our Substack, which is a free platform. The link will be in the description below. And you can see long-form written articles from both myself and Ender. So, Ender, we start with our moment of the week, rugby-wise. So, Chris and Nye, it can be something that you've seen on a rugby pitch. It can be something that you've seen vaguely rugby-related on social media. It can be anything you like. So, Ender, what was your favourite rugby moment of the week just gone?
So for me, and I'm sure at least one of you must have seen it, the video of the Fiji team sing their hymn. I know they do this regularly before and after some of their games. So it was a really cool version. It was long. And frankly, like, it was just such a nice relief after seeing, I don't know if any of you have seen the clips of the Irish team. Like, I'm a massive Irish fan, obviously I'm Irish, but seeing the Icelandic clap, I'm just so bored of it. And it's just so unoriginal. So for me, yeah, seeing that clip of the Fiji team yesterday sing in harmony, it was brilliant. It was spine tingling. And yeah, just after the Irish lads did the clap, I was delighted to see that. And I think your moment of the week is probably pretty similar.
Yeah,
based on the Welsh lads.
Yeah, so obviously everyone got excited about the Welsh lads doing the sing. So the Welsh lads sang Cullen Lan, which is a hymn that's in Welsh. So everyone loved that. It was led by Corey Domachowski, the loose head prop, was stood at the front belting it out. And yeah, it went down a storm on social media. We've also seen Dan Bigger doing his speech in French, which has gone down extremely well. And everyone in Wales was feeling pretty excited about it until we saw Fiji doing their song with literal like 5-part harmonies, and it was pretty special. But I think at least we can take some solace in. I think for me, the Welsh players' suits are the nicest suits that we've seen in these World Cup welcoming ceremonies so far. No white trainers, which is nice. What about you guys, Chris and Nye? Anything that caught your eye?
I think just on the back of that, on Twitter, the debates about the suits had me. There's kind of people on there rating the suits, rating the fit of the suits. There's people on there taking the mickey at the Irish players because their ties weren't long enough. People sort of the suede Oxfords were the best choice, and it was just everything around it opening of the World Cup. And then suddenly everyone sort of turned into a fashion critic. It was it's funny.
Yeah, similar. The England team didn't come out great. I think they came out of like ill-fitting boys' suits as an England fan, but it was good to watch. It was good to see it. It's good to see that kind of hype getting built into the World Cup, and it's almost like it's here now. It's ready to go, and it's quite exciting.
Yeah. So what was it about Courtney Laws didn't fancy turning up? What do we think of that?
Yeah. Bad news. I've said for a while now I'm a bit concerned about the amount of injury that's kind of being carried into the World Cup from the squad. I mean, I looked at it as something like 23-25% if you include Courtney Laws that's actually carrying or recently rehabbed from some description of injury. So it'll be interesting in a competition where depth and like injuries are going to happen. It'll be really interesting how that pans out as they move through. Thankfully, our side of the draw is relatively forgiving. Barcelona and Argentina, so maybe less so. But it's going to be a long old tournament, I think, for English fans.
Well, as a Welsh fan, I can say I only hope. So our first section that we go into on the pod is the big rugby news of the week. So first, we need to issue a correction from last week, don't we, Ender?
Yep, already. Unfortunately, we've made an error. No, we did discuss, and I don't know if you lads have heard this. So there were some murmurings about Michael Hooper and like some of the reasons why he was left out of the squad. But apparently these have all been put to bed. So we've been informed by Prendle on Twitter that these were completely not true. But I don't know, lads, if you heard any of those rumors about Michael and apparently not getting on with the squad or with the management, or there was a rumor about that going around, but it's completely false. But just wondering if you heard of it at all.
I heard something about it, but like I said, it's so hard to pay any stock to that because no one ever names their source, right? No one ever puts their hand up saying, like, it was me. I said that they were manageable in canvas or anything like that. It's always difficult to say, but it's good to see. I've seen as well that it said that it'd come out and people said quashed it. Basically, no, it's not true. There are a multitude of reasons to why it wasn't going to make cut.
I think it's got lost in what is the sort of the Eddie Jones bubble and what is the Australia now. And I think there's the Steve Hansen coming in. I'm sure we're going to get onto it later with the sort of Cipriani and the Eddie Jones bubble. And there's just so much going on with Australia and the management and everything at the moment that's really hard, I think, to sort of pick one strand and not get stuck on it all.
Yeah. Well, we will come on to Cipriani in a moment, but just one more bit of news before we do that. So it's gone round. I think it was Gavin Mares. We can't pronounce anything right on this podcast. It's a tradition. Has broken a story, I believe it was in the Telegraph, about the Champions Cup being restructured again for next season, with potentially the English teams only going down to 5 guaranteed entrants. I don't know, start with yourself, Chris, as an English fan. What's your reaction to that?
Makes sense, right? It's a bit odd when you look at it out of a 10-team league now, obviously missing Wasps, Worcester and Irish. Taking 8 into the Champions Cup, it seems a bit heavy. It just feels wrong, and particularly without because you want to reward performance, right? So you want to reward those going into that top 5 or top whatever position is you've got. And they're the ones that get to go to the Champions Cup. So much as I'd like to see more English teams there on the European stage, it feels right as a proportion for it to go down from 8 to towards that 5 mark. And then you look at the teams that are in from our side that would be in for this year, for example. It makes much more sense in terms of where they all sat versus who would actually go.
Yeah, I think particularly, when Bath qualified, and of course Bristol have now got in since Irish went past. But I think when Bath qualified, it as 8th place at the time, that was kind of a bit like Bath had been quite poor for a long time. So to see them getting to the Champions Cup when, obviously as a Welsh rugby fan, people get angry about we get 1 place on geography. But to see maybe like the 8th place team in the Premiership get in, for me, made less sense. What about yourself?
The Bath going in, you miss out on Russell and like some serious talent. No, sorry, but like I say on Bath, it's really interesting. Even though, like I say, I agree with it. With Bath now going out, they've just brought in Russell. They've just brought in some serious talent on that side of things. So you're going to miss them on the European stage now as well, because when you give with one hand, you take with the other, right? It's going to be an interesting season, I think, as to how rugby pans out.
Yeah, absolutely. Nye, from your point of view, what would you say about the constant restructuring of what's supposed to be one of the biggest draws in rugby? Is Europe starting to lose a bit of its shine for you?
I think it is in a way, and then I think it's not. I don't think they're doing it just for the sake of doing it. I think they've almost been forced. No one looked at sort of the Prem and the RFU. No one ever planned to lose sort of 2-3 clubs in what is a space of a season and something like that. So I think it's almost that in a way their hands has been forced, that they need to sort of look at it. And I think that the proof will be in the pudding. I think we'll look at sort of the caliber of the games, hopefully should get better because we are selecting sort of the better teams. But I think we've got to let it play out. I think we've got to see if they do restructure and they do make changes. I think we've almost at this point, we've got to let that happen. No one changes it to make it worse on purpose. I think if they are changing it, they must be changing it with a view to make it better. And all right, that's quite trusting on my part. But I think we've got to let them do it, and then either sort of clap and say well done, or absolutely berate them on the podcast afterwards. So
yeah. Okay, look, guys, let's get into the juicy stuff now then. So Danny Cipriani has written a book, and it is being serialized, I believe. Is it again in the Telegraph? Is it the Telegraph or the Times?
It's the Times.
It's the Times. Okay, so he's got some stories to tell. I think he's always been known as one of the, I think they are traditionally known as the colourful characters of rugby. who wants to go first? You know, I could sit and read quotes of it for an entire podcast. And how about yourself, mate? I mean, what have you made of some of the quotes that we've seen from it so far?
Interesting to say the least, aren't they? And I did read that extract where he said he came on, what was it, for 15 minutes and he got man of the match. But then it turns out it was a Twitter poll that basically decided that he was man of the match and not the official commentator or whatnot. Look, I don't know. Like it's a bit. It reminds me a bit of soccer. This kind of stuff that's going. Like it's fascinating in the lead up to the World Cup. Like we'd all have to admit that we probably love it, but we're not. I like as a rugby fan, I'm not really used to this, especially from an Irish perspective. You don't hear these stories come out, and if there are these stories, they're usually buried by the IRFU. So you'd never see a player come out like this. So it's interesting. It's distracting. It's yet more information on Eddie and what it was like under his regime, and it kind of reinforces my prediction for Australia doing really poorly. Yeah, because it looks like he can't manage everyone on the squad well. So yeah, just it's fascinating. And again, but one thing you always have to be wary of with these things is he telling the truth? Is all of this, an honest reflection? I'm sure Eddie would deny a lot of those things, especially that comment about a female. Which adds to it. But look, at this age, I'm looking forward to World Cup just starting now and actually talking about the action, not talking about these distractions. But it's a little bit of soccer-esque for me. Maybe I'm just coming from a bubble in here in Ireland, but interesting to hear. Maybe starting with yourself, Nye. What are your thoughts on this?
I think financially they picked the best time, haven't they? And just to go away from sort of Cipriani, but so I think Maggie Alfonsi, Lawrence Delalio have both again released a book in the last sort of 2 weeks on the lead up. Obviously, these stories couldn't have been released a year ago or a year later. Obviously, now's the perfect time. So I think it is a little bit of, like you say, football-esque. It is a little bit of what's juicy, what sells, stories sell, and they picked the right time. They absolutely come off the hype of the World Cup and used it to do this. I think again, with the Eddie Jones bubble and the press conferences and the Steve Harris and Steve Hansen, and you can call it all sort of Eddie Jones mind games and publicity, and sort of now Australia almost sort of underdog from their previous sort of performances. So it is a bit sort of football-esque, but I sort of leave it there. It's all hype, and I think generally it is towards the World Cup. And as soon as the games start, all of the sort of tales and the stories about books will sort of go away into the background after that first sort of kickoff happens, I think.
And what about yourself, Chris? Danny hasn't had many positive things to say about the environments or the coaching styles of the coaches who didn't select him. Do you think it's straight bitterness, or do you think all those coaches were wrong and Danny Cipriani should have been England's 10 for the last 10 years?
The honest answer is I don't know, because I wasn't there. Like, I obviously massive maverick of a player, right? And you see what happens with the likes of Finn Russell when, yes, they go through some times where that rogue pass loses you the game, whatever happens. But then as they develop and become that 10, and I think you can hear coaches talk about it, where it tends in particular take a longer time to develop and grow into that game plan. So what would have been is impossible to say. I will say on it though, and me and I were talking about this recently actually, there's a big kind of drive, and obviously from our side of things in terms of around fantasy, for players to have like big personalities and stuff and bring that to the fore. But then it does feel a little bit when someone does that, like say we go and we're like, oh, don't do that, go quiet, tall poppy syndrome, all that kind of jazz. Like say it's a bit football-esque, but then again, football's the most successful sport in the world, right? Surely we'd like to emulate some of that stuff. And I'm not saying don't take away from the rugby, but whether it's true or not, it makes for a good story. And you look at this World Cup coming up, and you've got, I mean, the potential of Eddie playing against his old England squad again, or Michael Cheika from Argentina, right? The amount of stories that are going to come up and bubble up throughout this World Cup only adds to the drama of what promises to be a really good spectacle. So whether or not I believe everything that was said, or I think it needs to be taken with a large bucket of salt, I think if nothing else, it adds to the drama and the flavor of the tournament. So I think it's no bad thing, right, for a little bit of an extra story.
Yeah, I think I go with all of that, to be fair. So, guys, that's the major rugby news covered. We will cover, as we like to do, some of the more obscure games at the end of the pod. But for now, we want to hear all about Dream Team Rugby and what you guys are doing. So going back to yourself then, Chris. So what is Dream Team Rugby for anybody who hasn't come across you on Twitter so far?
Yeah, so hopefully for the many of you that haven't, we're a fantasy rugby platform essentially. So what we're looking to do is build a fantasy rugby site or game for the Premiership, which doesn't currently exist. I know it has previously with things like Rugby Mac and Superoo offer some predictor games and things like that. But me and Nia played Fantasy on the Six Nations and various platforms. It's great, right? Like such a good way to engage the game. We start looking at, is there one for the Prem? I'm a big, obviously, England fan. Getting more into that over a couple of years, and we developed the idea that we can and that we can do it. So hence Dream Team Rugby was born over a beer or three, as it may be. And now we're in the development process. So we kind of put ourselves out there a couple of weeks ago, or even a month ago now, talking about what we're going to do. We've launched the blog page to kind of keep people up to date with where we're at and what we're as we build through it. But at its core, we are a kind of a fantasy game for the Premiership.
Fantastic. So, Nai, as Chris alluded to there, fantasy rugby is something that has existed before in the past, but it's not always taken off. So, what for you would you like to do differently from what we've seen, say, from the Six Nations attempts to do fantasy rugby?
Well, a lot of the big thing is the Six Nations obviously came to a lot of different countries, and we're going after something quite niche, quite this sort of Premiership. And amongst the sort of the beers and the joking and us sort of playing with it, when we sort of looked at it, we wanted something, and we eventually broke it down to 4 areas. So it has to benefit rugby as a whole, as a sport. It has to benefit in some way the Premiership, and then the clubs and the fans, players. So we sort of try to break it down to similar bits into what we wanted to do. And our plan was to come up with a fantasy platform that kept everybody happy, built for the fans and by the fans. And by making it as sort of as fan-centered as possible, well, everything that then comes from that is based on the fan. So the Premiership should be doing things based on that fan base, based on what their fans want. They should be running it on that. At the same time, looking after player welfare and looking after players, developing players and helping what we can do. So it was what we wanted is something that we would be happy to play. We wanted something as fantasy rugby players that we want to play and that would draw as many people in as possible to come in. So everyone from somebody that just wants to play with their work friends, their friends at their local rugby club, and just socially sort of play it, and something that if you wanted to would help all of those absolutely sort of analytic people that love stats, that love going in and digging into the data for individual players. Yeah, and it was something with an idea to keep everybody happy. So it would be simple for somebody that isn't a massive fan of sort of fantasy and details, but at the same time really engage the people that are. That's really why we've taken this opportunity and taken this chance to go and do something ourselves, because then we know what we end up with and we know what we want, really.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah. And I think we didn't realise that until at least a few beers. Yeah. And at first it seems quite a simple process. You've just got to go and try and find the data and then just build a website, get it out to people, done. But it's we're learning things daily, weekly. I've learned that Chris has no time for solicitors, doesn't trust them, doesn't like them. So we're learning stuff, and again, looking in the data, we're learning so much more. I've played rugby, I coached rugby, I've refereed rugby, and I'm still learning things about rugby now, the business side, the Prem side. I'm still learning bits about rugby going through this process.
And how far along the process are you? Like, where are you now in terms of like, when do you have a launch date in mind, or is it are you kind of trying to be coy with that because you are kind of maybe running into things that are taking a bit longer to work through and whatnot?
No. So we'd initially planned. So we wanted to do it this season, but as Nia alluded to, it's like a big learning curve, right? So it sounds really simple in its process. But actually, when you start getting into the nitty gritty and the details of it, what it takes to launch, the agreements you have to have in place, the regulatory environment that surrounds it in terms of how you're going to monetize it, all that kind of stuff, right? Because we can fund it, but then we think of a way of how we're going to continue to do that and how we're going to make it sustainable as well. So all of that's taken us basically this first year-ish to build up. So we're looking at a launch for the 24-25 season. So not the one coming up in October, much as we would love to, but for the 24-25 Prem season as it kicks off. It's kind of open for the launch. So the site will be live by August, if all goes to plan from here, but with some testing in between. So that's part of the reason we wanted to launch the Twitter and the social media and get ourselves out there a little bit, is because as we go through this process, there's one thing to build the site, then we have to start running some traffic through it and making sure it works. So there's a few tournaments in between now and then where we can actually do that. So you look at the likes of the Six Nations, some of the big games where we can actually play with and give people a chance to get hands-on feel for it. It gives us a chance to get some feedback and test the system. So hard launch August, but plenty happening in between.
Exciting times. So, Nye, when I got to spend some time with you when we went to see England versus Fiji the other day, and you were telling me about some ideas you had around incorporating the women's game into it and the Premier 15s into it. That's really exciting. Can you don't have to give everything away, but maybe give some clues as to what people might be able to look forward to?
Definitely, and it was one of the things that when we looked at who this had to benefit, and rugby as the whole is one of them. I help coach a local women's team, and obviously in the last few years, the professionalism of the women's game and everything has come on leaps and bounds. The sort of spearheaded by sort of Red Roses and the wins in the World Cup and the Premiership being founded, and it's huge. And it was one of the things that when we looked at sort of who can we help benefit this. You would never, ever see, and we will never see it in the future, a women's rugby team go and play a men's rugby team. That won't happen. We'll never see a sort of woman in a man's rugby game in the Premiership, in a World Cup or anything like that. But what we can do is we can do a fantasy game that incorporates them. So you can have women rugby players up against men rugby players. They won't be on the same pitch, they won't be battling each other. But that's not to say that the number 8 for that team and the number 8 for that team can't be judged through a simple set of metrics. So yeah, it's coming up with a game and coming up with ideas. And again, this isn't sort of a year down the line, but 3-4 years down the line. If we end up seeing women Premiership games being played on the same weekend as a men's Premiership game, there's no reason why that actually picking your Premiership 15-23 over that weekend shouldn't incorporate both men's and women's players. And we throw this around our selective sort of pub group every time we have ideas. And somebody came up with the idea that, well, that'd be pointless because nobody had ever picked the women. But when you look at it, some of the Premiership players, women players, they're by simple sort of scoring metrics, fantasy scoring metrics. Some of these women players' stats are phenomenal. Would absolutely sort of would wipe, especially sort of the forwards, the front 8. Some of the women's stats would absolutely blow the men's stat out of the water. So if you did just sort of not want to pick the women and pick the men, do so. But I think you'd be doing so at your own peril, I think. But yeah, it was one of the ideas. And going forward, like we said, we want to help grassroots. We want to help sort of rugby charities. We want this fantasy is a great thing, and I think if done right, it can help all aspects of rugby, not just sort of that championship, not just that league, not just that club. I think if we do it right, hopefully everyone will benefit from this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't know about you, Ender, but when Nye told me that concept of incorporating the women's game, I thought that was a game changer. I think if that happens, that's something really, really exciting.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's the first time I've heard of a group of guys trying to do something like that. So it sounds like a unique idea as well, which is fascinating. And women's sport in general is growing. So in 3-4 years' time, when you guys have this ready to go as well, I think you'll be in the right place at the right time, I think. And like we are all trying to grow women's rugby too, aren't we? So like it'll be great, I think, to see them involved in it. Yeah, brilliant initiative.
Yeah. So Chris, what kind of customer do you think you'll get? Because I think there's a perception sometimes with rugby that the fans are a little bit old-fashioned. Do you think that that's fair? Do you think there's going to be are there going to be people who say this isn't for rugby, or are you expecting any kind of opposition, or do you think that people are going to be really receptive to this sort of thing?
The answer is a mix of both, right? As with anything. So hopefully very receptive. Everyone that we've spoken to has been very receptive and loves the game. I mean, many people played the Six Nations, I think, as their first kind of encounter of fantasy sports, right? Started over in the States, got really big. It became very much like a thing. You'd go down to your mate's house, you'd have like a thing where you pick all your draft and all that stuff. We're missing out some of that, but it's just an additional way of engaging the game. That's not to say they won't be the stalwarts of the game who are like, I've said for a while now, rugby is still in its fledgling stages of professionalism and still struggles with that. So you still have people who want it to be something you do as a hobby down the, down the local club, and then you pull on your shirt for pride of country, and that's kind of how it should be. Not saying that we'll be able to convince you. Come and chat to us if you think that, and I'll try. But I think there's a large basis. I mean, we looked at some stats and some numbers around rough estimations of what the kind of fan base is like for the Premiership. I think we looked at about between 1 and 1.5 million people roughly actively engaged with the Prem on a regular basis, which is great, right? And this is not only to help grow, like, that existing base, but I think it helps grow the base bigger, right? It makes the pie bigger. It's a way for people who might not be able to play, can't get down your club, can't do whatever, but you can still engage with the game. You can still engage with your favorite players, and it's a way for those players. It brings the fan and the club, the player, closer together, which I think is a massive benefit. And it's one of the things that rugby needs to do, right? Is how do you engage, particularly in England? I can speak from that experience, but and it's been well reported on the tickets at Twickenham being, £100, £200. I think I looked at Six Nations tickets for next year, and we're looking around 200 or 300 sometimes, depending on the game. Your average 20-year-old come through university, plays rugby, isn't necessarily going to be able to afford that. So how do you engage and keep those kids in rugby? And because that's where your base is, right? That's where your future is, and you need to grow that. And fantasy is a way to do that, I think. So hopefully we can reach out to them and give them a mechanism to actually be a part of it.
Yeah, I think when I was talking to Nai the other day, with what football has had with fantasy football, and I'm sure it's the same in the States, where fantasy game is so big over there, is rather than just caring about your own team, like you'll be watching now other games that don't involve the team that you support and thinking, oh my god, who got the try assist for that try? Is it helping my fantasy? And so it turns you from watching maybe one game a week into watching all of them.
Yeah.
Whether
I'll admit it, but
whether I want a minute on TV, but one of the reasons that we thought this would really work was, I think, a year and a half, 2 years ago now. As a Welshman sat in a pub in England, England scored against Wales, and I think it was Anthony Watson that went over and scored in the corner. And I happened to have him in my fantasy team. So even though I was there with a Welsh top on and a few other Welsh people, the Welsh sort of head went down and the moment came up, and suddenly there was a little cheer from myself, mainly because I had sort of Anthony Watson in my fantasy team. But we sort of laughed and joked, and I was like, when would you ever sort of find a Welshman even be a little bit happy about England being scoring against Wales? And I think
scoring at all.
Yeah, and so we decided then, it was like, this is like, if it's got the power to do that, surely sort of fantasy sport can cross. And like the Americans do, they do fantasy sport so well that they don't have supporters of individual clubs. They have supporters of their fantasy team. There's sort of people out there that make their own merchandise and like sell their own merchandise from their own fantasy sports teams, and sort of don't necessarily follow an individual team in the NFL or the NBA, because they're so engrossed in the fantasy game that they don't do that. We're not hoping to get it to that extent, because obviously we said that it needs to benefit everyone, but there's definitely an opportunity, I think, to get fantasy sport.
As you alluded to, Hugh, I think you talk about it gives you width as well as depth. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of trying to grow more players into the sport, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. More like fans and following for the sport, which is absolutely the right thing to do, right? It's been the focus of many of the rugby boards across the world for many years, trying to hammer how to do that. I think fantasy gives you a way to get more out of the fan base that you already have. So you're getting width as well as depth. So I think that's kind of how we're looking at it, based on what we hope to do.
And that's
Yeah.
fascinating too. Like that will get more people. Like, so instead of just your sales sharks fan, they'll actually care about players playing for other teams and get them more involved. The only caveat to that is, of course, the problem with the. So one area I always kind of look at is broadcasting rights, and obviously it's quite frustrating. Like if you look at Newcastle Falcons for their first 11 games of this upcoming season, are going to be on TNT Sports. Every other game is essentially pay-per-view. So hopefully that changes, and that's something that we can all look at. But like even those players who, or even those, players who are interested in it, they will still be able to watch those games. Like those pay-per-view games are obviously still available. But also it's worth noting when you guys are launching, that's when we'll have a new TV deal in place for the Prem as well, because this is the last year of the current deal. So who knows what will change? Because I know that there have been a lot of calls for more games to be broadcast. Like if you look at the URC, both you and I are massive URC fans, and we can watch every single game for relatively low price as well. So hopefully that's something that we see improve as well.
I think it'll be coming. I mean, if you look at some of I think there were three. The viewership for the Premiership, the viewership record got broken 3 times this year, each consecutive. So the big game between it was the Bears and Harlequins, the Saracens Harlequins game, and the Premiership final. All 3 of them broke the last one's record, and the record was set the season before. So much as the story is downturn and doom and gloom in rugby around the clubs, particularly around the Premiership, I think there's some serious upside to look at, and there's some promise there, right? So the more access you give to it, even if it is pay-per-view. I watched I don't know if you guys watched the Good Brother Rugby as well, but they had a really interesting story to talk about. Like, pretty much everything's on pay-per-view now, but it's about how you manage that. I think the really difficult thing is being able to have one place that I'm paying to view, right? I don't want to be having to go to 17 different channels to find the game I want, and then the highlights on YouTube. I think hopefully we can hammer that out in the next. I say we, it's not my problem, but the Premiership can hammer that out in the next couple of years, and it makes things much easier to follow.
Yeah, and exactly, and the reason those viewership numbers are up as well is because they brought ITV on board, and same with the URC. They've got in Ireland. Like I'm a Connacht fan, I can watch every single Connacht game on free-to-air television. So I think that the rugby powers that be are recognizing the importance of free-to-air, so they seem to be trying to find that balance, which is great. Sorry, Hugh, you were going to jump in there.
I was just going to say, Chris, you'll go far on this podcast with your desire to see a streamlined rugby broadcasting strategy. That's something that if other people are interested, you can check out episode 2 of the podcast, where Enda takes us through the mire of rugby broadcasting and how many broadcasters we have to put up with. Right, guys, so a bit of fun now. So we're going to move on to this section. So people listening to this might be thinking, but guys, there is a fantasy rugby game going for the World Cup. Now, obviously, it's not a dream team rugby game, so it won't be as good as what you guys would be offering, I'm sure. But we thought we'd have a go at it now. So it'll be a bit of fun for us to have a look at and pick some players that we think are going to do well. But it also gives us a chance to discuss like the mechanics of the game as well and what we do and don't like about it. So guys, I'm going to need you to tell me when you can see the screen. All good?
It's up now, mate.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, so rule. I know that now when I spoke to you, you don't like too many rules, but here on the Pirate Rugby, we like to spread the love. So I'm going to enforce a rule, 1 player per nation. Okay, wow. So we get to get a good mix of tier 2 players in there. We get to see maybe give a bit of exposure to some players that people don't know about. And also it makes us think a bit harder, because it means that if you say go for, I don't know, Stephen Kitsoff as the loosehead prop, you can't then go for Manu Lebock or Faf de Klerk or Dwayne Vermeulen. So it's a bit more of a test for you guys and see how well you know your rugby. So let's kick off then. 1 player per nation. So is there any players that absolutely have to be in there for anybody?
I think it's So I wrote a blog on this the other day, actually, talking about just this. And it's really interesting that you mentioned kind of one player per nation, because that makes it even more complex. I think what a lot of people have done is they've gone out for like your Antoine Duponts, right? Who undeniably one of the best players in the world, if not the best player in the world, arguably for a long, long time. One of the things to look at, which actually doesn't necessarily benefit, but you can get a lot of the tier twos in, is what you're looking for is mismatch, right? So the games that we're looking at are not necessarily that you're the best player playing that round, but that you're like, who are you playing against? It's going to allow you to score. So while Antoine Dupont is fantastic, and if you were picking and drafting a team, obviously in your team, however, he's playing against New Zealand this week, right?
Yes, correct.
Maybe not your 9 that's going to contain his skills as well as anyone is, where perhaps an Italy or a Japan might have better luck playing against a significantly mismatched team, not to be, because we all love an underdog story.
Yeah, absolutely.
General
So,
point.
so who have Italy got this weekend then?
Namibia.
Namibia.
Namibia. Ah, so that's an opportunity
One of
for
the big
them to
ones.
say Namibia have never won a World Cup fixture, I don't believe. I think they were excited to play Canada last time out, but that game got cancelled for the typhoon. So if we're talking about an Italy player then, who springs to mind?
So,
He's
scored,
expensive though.
scored that try against Wales, I think, where Josh Adams handed in the man of the match trophy. Absolutely stepped in blind, doing it for the little kids. Stepped in, went in, won the game for Italy. Josh Adams gave him the man of the match. I think as a winger or fullback, you'd expect him to be on that score sheet probably all day, I think, against Namibia.
The other pot there is something else to consider, just to make it more difficult. You have got Tommaso Allen, who also plays in the back 3 and is a kicker. So you've got some guaranteed points coming through there if you get an extra in your team. Look, I'll shut up.
Okay, so I fancy going for Capuozzo. I like with you, Nye, I'm going to have him scarred onto my memory forever. What he did to Wales, how dare he? As one of the commentators called him on the Romania game, I think they called him the ballistic pixie or something like that. So first thing to say about the mechanics of the game is that it's allowed me to pick a full back on the wing. So that's reasonably normal. I don't have much of a problem with that. A lot of teams do play fullbacks on the wing, like Will Jordan for New Zealand is a fullback, plays on the wing. So that's okay. We'll see how that holds up for the rest of the team. So who else have we got to get in then? So did you say Japan have got a mismatch in first week up?
Japan versus Chile. Much as we all love Chile and wonderful story, it's one of the bigger mismatches.
So
if you've been following Japan, Nakamura in the centres, I'm seeing their team sheet. He's been having some storming games. I think he's definitely one to watch for Japan. I think there's who else? Oh, it was the winger had a storming World Cup last year. Mashimura, was it?
Matsushita, I think it is.
Yeah, Matsushita. Again,
also got Michael Leach in your back 3. You want him? Sorry, back row.
Big game against Chile. Yeah.
I agree. The center partnership is one of the harder ones.
Yeah, centre partnership absolutely the most difficult. Okay, so Ender, how about you? Where do you fancy going next?
Okay, so any other mismatches this weekend?
Fiji are playing Wales. Is that a mismatch?
Absolutely. Well, Ireland are playing
Romania.
Yeah. It's I think Italy, Namibia, Italy are up. Ireland, Romania. So Ireland positive.
That's the biggest one.
Japan, Chile, Japan positive. Australia, Georgia. Australia sort of you'd back them against Georgia.
But then Georgian scrum,
and then I think you've got 3 tight games in Fiji, Wales, South Africa, Scotland, England, Argentina are relatively sort of close. But the 4, I think Italy, Ireland, Japan, Australia. If you were sort of not stuck to Hugh's rule of one for each.
Load up.
Yeah, you'd be loading 3 from each of them 4, I think. It's the
Okay, so my question for Ender then. So, yes, Ireland are playing Romania, but is it a bit difficult to predict who will actually be on the pitch for this? Because
That's exactly right.
presumably Ireland will play a very changed team.
You're dead right. So now there have been rumours that Sexton might get some game time, but he needs it. But if he does, he wouldn't play the full game. But obviously, you're guaranteed some kicks with him, and there are going to be a lot of tries. But what if they don't pick him? Ronan Kelleher was up for media duty. He's been out injured for a while, so he might be getting a start. We do tend to score a lot of maul tries.
Okay.
Could he be a shout?
I like it.
Or we could just go with Ross Byrne. But see, we don't know if it's going to be, even if Sexton doesn't start, we don't know if it's going to be Ross Byrne or Crowley getting that. Yeah, so we'll go Kelleher. I'd be happy enough. What do you think, lads?
This is an official Crowley fan podcast. I need to be clear. So Ross Byrne's not.
I try to be balanced and give the Byrne viewpoint, but yeah.
it's difficult. I mean, that Irish back 3. I mean, like Nick Hampson, Lowe. Like Hugo. All of them have been absolute getting over the whitewash, getting points in. So I'd like to back them. Any one of them of getting over the try line probably a couple of times, but again, it's if they're playing and which one of them three do you pick? They're a dangerous sort of high performing back 3. I think difficult.
Okay, so what was the 4th mismatch as well? So we've got Ireland, Italy, Japan. Who was the other one?
And you've got Australia, Georgia.
In rankings, not that far off.
Yeah, in rankings, not that far, but you'd still like to probably see an Australia come out on top there.
Okay, so I've got the name that I've got in mind straight away for Australia. For me, hands down, their best player is Angus Bell as the prop. Now, we've got to pick props. How would you award points for a prop in a fantasy rugby team? Obviously, you'd expect them if they get a try, they get a point or points. But how else do the props do we think are gonna make the points? I'm sure it says somewhere on the website. I haven't started looking it up. But yeah, Carson Gordon as well is almost certain to play. Go on, sorry.
So in this game they get points for scrums. So there's some weird language and like not clarity around how the points are awarded, but they say for an outright win of a scrum, they award each of the front row 3 points. Things like meters carried, right? So they'll get points for that. Angus Bell, big proponent for that one, obviously. And the Australian scrum did exceptionally well against what is an outstanding French scrum last Sunday as well. So yeah, not a bad shout. I'm not sure I'd want. Because they're going to get the points from the scrummage. Whether you want them against the Georgian scrum, interesting question.
Georgia's scrum for me is a little bit of a myth. It traditionally is good, but I don't think it's the strongest part of their game. To be honest, I think against tier 1 nations, I've not really seen them slam anyone into reverse. I have to be honest. By the way, Angus Bell, 4.5 value. That is massively undervalued in my opinion.
Yeah. Props are generally quite inexpensive, but like you say, Angus Bell gets some really good carrying points as well. So
yeah,
Eddie Jones does like a fast mobile prop. So yeah, I think he's a good shout.
Cool. So Nye, let's talk about Wales. What Welsh player do you reckon has to be in this?
I genuinely, again, it'd be really interesting. Gatland's hasn't played the same side since he's come in. I think he's changed whole sort of back rows, back lines. It's almost to the point where I'm not quite sure he knows what his sort of first choice side is. It's been really difficult for Wales. We've run out against sort of England. We've run out against other people in the warm up and changed our side so much, changed the captain so much. I would like to think that the Welsh back row has proven. Jack Morgan, I think, has been sort of the standout star. and I'd like to see him sort of continue. I think he did really well as a young player, but as captain at home against England, did the right job, didn't make a mistake, level-headed, calm, cool, and just did some great stuff on the park. I'd like to see sort of him in there.
Yeah, I love it. I think he's going to make great. I think he's going to he's a great ball carrier. Attacks the space with ball in hand as well. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't put it past him to do a 50-22 at some point either. I think he's going to be a superstar for a long time. Yeah.
If you follow our fan base, a 50-22 for a prop would award you points. When we pushed it out, when we pushed it out and said what deserves points in the fantasy game, the prop kicking a 50-22 was up there for points.
Yeah, absolutely, love it. Okay, and what about, let's stick with you now. What Fiji player are you most afraid of?
Both for their centre partnership. Skipper last week, man of the match, I think. Well, the winner was man of the match. Yeah, Ramradra was phenomenal. He was, I think that link up with Sam Matavesi, that sort of forwards doing what backs do, stepping somebody, the offload, and then you've got the back absolutely sort of boshing somebody off. So I'd like to think, I think the other centre, Semi Ramradra, would absolutely.
Just to throw a spanner in the works, someone who didn't play last weekend, Vani Bhatia, who has yet to actually come out.
So where's let's see where he's listed, because is he listed as a back row? So he's listed as a back row. Yeah, not a centre.
He's almost certainly playing. Fiji are targeting that game.
14.1.
He's expensive, but he's good. And he's a fiend over the ball.
He's been picked,
Yeah.
So I think that's a good shout. I'll tell you why, because I'm not sure Ramradra is going to start, because they've got Josh Tuisova and Naithalevu. We have to give lots of love to our Fiji viewers on this channel. They show us the love. We have to show it back. But I think Ramradra could find himself on the bench, if potentially not in 23, because Tuisova is such a good option as well. Naithalevu we know is going to play because he's the captain. So I'm all for Bhatia. Let's go for it. And that's good because it keeps a centre option open for someone I am determined to get into the team later. Okay, so what about yourself, Chris? What England player needs to be in
there? Looking at what's available. So I was going to say, so for England, for a very specific reason, Jamie George, but that's only because you get extra points if they play beyond 60 minutes. And given that England haven't changed their hooker more than once across the entire warm-ups, he's almost a shoe-in for the full 80. But if we're saying that, I wouldn't give it the 10. Certainly that's from Hall. Not that great deal.
For those of you who don't know, Chris has spent the last sort of 3 months in the warm-up to this World Cup selecting his England team. So
100%.
This might take a while.
Yeah, come back in a minute.
Okay. I think your Jamie George shout is very valid, by the way, because I really like Theo Dan, and if it was me, I'd be putting my eggs in his basket. But I completely agree that we've seen that, given the option, Borthwick could rather not take Jamie George off the pitch.
Against Argentina, which is this round, right? He's not. That's a big game. You don't want to make big risks.
Big game. The big game.
Chris, sorry. Oh, Chris, make a decision.
Okay. I love Stewart. I think Freddie Stewart is wildly underrated in today's for all his accolade or for all his hype. I still think he gets a lot of stick. Because they say it's a one-trick pony with his thing in the air, but when he changes team's game plan, you saw against Wales where Liz Costello talking about how changes the kicking plan because Freddie Stewart's in the backfield, someone who's that aerially strong despite recent performance against Fiji. Gotta be in the team.
Cool. Yeah, I'd go with that as well. I think he's as good as any player you've got at the moment. What about Argentina then? So who's going to be our Argentina pick?
So you've already got your hooker, and I mean, Leo Montoya is an excellent if not one of the best in the game. You've also got Santiago Carreras. I always get the Carreras mixed up. So Mateo Carreras, the winger, plays for Newcastle. That kid has some pace. Absolutely amazing. Their back row is also potent, but then you've got who else to choose from. So should we leave it to the man in the Argentina shirt to pick the Argentina player?
Go on then. I'm going to go for Buffelli because he kicks the goals, and that's easy fantasy points.
Sure.
Next.
So we've got 3 fullbacks in our back 3, which this game will let you do. Which again, I don't necessarily have too much of a problem with. I think England could end up with 3 fullbacks on the pitch. Anyway, right, I'm going to quickly do my one that I'm going to insist on as the person moving the mouse. A player that I am sort of in huge admiration of is Appleton for Portugal. Plays centre. He's their captain and he's their go-to guy. And I watched him playing some of the warm-up games, and I was really, really taken with watching him play. I think I'd like to see him get picked up by a big club somewhere. So he's who I'm going for.
So it's a running joke. We were playing. I was on rugby tour out in Portugal in Lisbon last year, and I think on talking we didn't quite understand the caliber of teams we were sort of playing. So we went out thinking it was a bit of a social tour. And pretty much ended up playing some of the top teams in Portugal. So a little bit out of our league, but it was always the sort of running joke that I've probably played against the Portuguese internationals somewhere in the mix, I think.
Just claim it. Don't let the shoes get in the way of a good story, mate. Ender, give me our fly half. Who's going for it? So we haven't got a French player in yet. We haven't got a Kiwi in it yet. We also don't have a Springbok. Or a Scottish player.
Well, we are Libbok fans, aren't we? And he is going to play this weekend.
He absolutely is.
So I would like to see Libbok.
Yeah, I agree.
Just because we're massive fans.
Well, we absolutely are. Interestingly, Damien Villenser is down as a fly half, which is what he is listed officially in South Africa's squad. But I would expect him to be playing fullback this weekend. Is my prediction. Difficult, isn't it? Nailing down that. What about scrum half? Who wants to give me a scrum half? Is DuPont a bit obvious? Do we want to go for someone maybe a bit more out there?
They're always difficult to pick, and you've got Thibaut Flament from the French team, who's an obvious choice. So locks are always your hard choices. So Antoine Dupont is your obvious choice. But is there someone else out there with some talent? I'd argue that, that they might be something to play with. Who you've got left in the games left to be chosen from? Got Georgia left to choose from. Still got Chile left to choose from.
Everyone's very excited by Uruguay's scrum half. I go to it.
Arata, yeah.
Arata. So everyone gets very excited by him. Who have they got? Let's just see.
They won't play this week.
He's not playing this weekend.
This week. Yeah.
Shame for him.
But separated into rounds. Round 1 is the first. It's a week, so there's 5 rounds of the pools stage, and they get an additional 3 rounds in the knockouts. Right. I'm sure we'll come on to it later, but in terms of how the actual mechanics of the game work, that influences things as well.
Okay, right. So we've got a bit
New Zealand.
Of cash. Oh, sorry, go on. So Aaron Smith would be New Zealand's, I guess, first choice scrum half.
Yeah, and if you're not going sort of DuPont because you haven't got the sort of points left, I mean, I hate to call Aaron Smith the sort of the backup because I'm sure he'll absolutely prove me wrong and sort of and pull it out the park against France. But yeah, you've got Aaron Smith as a sort of DuPont. I mean, that's going to be a brilliant battle to watch. I think.
Yeah.
Brilliant battle.
Yeah, I won't name him because it's rugby heresy, but someone messaged me today to tell me that Aaron Smith is head and shoulders better than Antoine Dupont. But I don't think you're allowed to say that out loud at the moment. Right, okay, so locks. We're missing locks. Ender, give me a lock.
Right, which nation are we not chosen somebody from.
Still no French. Still no Scottish.
No
Still no
Georgia.
Georgian.
Let's go with a Scot.
Okay.
Have a look at our Scottish options.
So Richie Gray, who must be about 48 at this point. It feels like he's been around forever. Grant Gilchrist, again, same again.
Great player,
Scott Cummings and Sam Skinner.
I mean, we got to get a Scot in there.
Yeah, so we've only got prop and loose forward left other than Locke.
He went.
You've got Schumann at prop.
You've also got Jack Dempsey at loose forward. Matt Fagerson. You've also there's so many to choose from. They have a magnificent back row. See, I always last, but
Finn Russell's done me proud in the Six Nations fantasy before. So I always he's gone. He's gone. Let's talk.
Yeah,
And you've got, or you could choose Aldrit from France, and you're looking forward to go for Gray and your lock.
I like that idea.
Yeah,
I love Aldrit. So let's go Richie Gray in at lock.
And
Congratulations, Richie. And then, loose forwards. We're going to go Aldrit. Okay, right. Other props. So I'm going to get to the other detail about this game. You are allowed to pick 2 loose heads or 2 tight heads. You don't have to pick one of each. Is that something that you would perhaps not choose to do in your game?
it's more difficult to do, and it's almost a reliant on the club naming their players. So if the club comes out and says this player is a centre, but we've seen, especially in World Cups, British Lions, etc., that depth players like Daly for England, British Lions but centre, but can play wing, but can play fullback. If somebody puts him on a bench, who's to say that I'm putting him on a bench for the centre, the wing, or the fullback? It's a really difficult sort of aspect to look at. And when we've looked at things as in props, I think, especially when you're looking at cross clubs, the fan base would, I guess, the tight head, loose head, unless they were purely that and not listed as any other. But I don't.
As a front row. So I think it's I think so. I don't mind it. I think
it takes away, it's a constant balance, right, between getting it as realistic as possible in the fantasy game while making it as accessible for the fans as possible as well. Because while there's the me and you can sit here and talk about all the players in the world and whether they play tight head and what portion of the game they played it tight versus loose, etc. So you have the likes of Sheridan, Balrapama, Ruskin in England who can play both. There's a multitude of them. So I think the way you probably do it is just to give them tags as prop, and they can be chosen in both. I don't mind it. It's a small price to pay, but it means you get to more engagement with those players, I suppose.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's a very good answer. So I'm hovering over Georgian players. We're yet to get a Georgian in. We've got an Australian prop. So are we maybe, I don't know, a bit of game theory, go sort of betting each way in this?
Get your bets.
So,
one of the scrums got to win, right?
They got to. You'd hope. So let's go for just the first one, just the first one that comes up. Nariashvili.
Which ironically, I think has just cost you more than Bell, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He does cost more than Bell. Very odd. Right, we've got 5.5 million left for our last block.
Nice.
So, who I would have liked to have picked for this to spread the love around would be Theo McFarland from Samoa, but sadly not playing in weekend 1. So we'll see you for week 2, Theo. Who are we
Fantastic player.
Yeah, Saracens boy, obviously.
You've got Chile. Chile is the only one playing left that's not been chosen. Although Portugal's also not playing this weekend.
Oh no, not Appleton.
No.
Let's take him out. So is there not enough teams playing to go around 15 selections? Only 14 teams playing.
You've got
should be 16 teams playing, shouldn't there? If there's 4 teams not playing, should be 16 teams playing.
From New Zealand, and you've got Japan, Chile, Italy, Namibia.
We haven't got a Namibian. We haven't got any Namibian players.
Namibia,
Right,
yeah.
Let's pick a Namibian lock. They're basically South African, right? Or is that? Can you not say that?
I'll say that.
Then
lock.
I'll give you a Chilean censor.
Cool. Yes. Right. Smashed it. Right. You, mate. T. de Klerk. You're our lock. Well done.
Great White Hope
Right.
board, yeah.
He's sure to share this on Twitter, I'm sure.
I'm sure he will. Right, and then we need a Chilean centre. Of course, if I was a real selector, I could pick their fly half as a second 5'8".
You picked a Romanian.
Oh no, we haven't picked a Romanian either.
Oh, we haven't picked a Romanian. Do you know any good Romanian centres?
Excellent
We should
question.
know. Endo, we're supposed to be the
Yeah,
experts. We should know.
I'd say stick
Tell you
with
what.
Chilean.
I'd go
Let's
Chilean, yeah.
Okay. So hang on. So we got Ayaza is the most expensive Chilean, and then we've got who was the other team? Romania. Yeah, more expensive than both the Romanians. So on that strength alone, reassuringly expensive. You're in. Right, there we
There we
are,
have it.
locked in. There's the Pirate Rugby Week 1 fantasy rugby team. We're not going to make our own league this time, but we will be joining all the other major leagues. So we'll join Squidge's league. We'll join if anybody else is
Rugby.
running a league. Oh, have you got a league? We'll be in your league. We'll see you there.
Yes. Got a good 1,800 people in, so a really good challenge. To
Good stuff.
Dream Team.
I was going to say we'll share it around, but actually, no. Can you share us? Cool. We'll join the Rap podcast as well because we love those guys. Right. Okay. Right. Thank you very much, guys. Right. So that's our bit of fun out of the way. So let's talk about the last of the rugby news for the Tier 2 roundup. So now we have a bit of a section on here. It's called Taffs Abroad. So as we know, there was a exodus of Welsh rugby players to the Pro D over the summer. But sadly, none of them were playing this weekend. So we can't talk about any of them. Rhys Webb's obviously got his troubles going on that we won't talk about. So Provence are still leading the way with Vaughan following them up, both unbeaten. Grenoble are slowly catching up to the bottom after their points deduction for financial breaches last season. Top 14 wise, Alwyn Jones and his Toulon side. You have to call them Alwyn Jones' Toulon now. It's the rules. They got beat by Bordeaux in a. So, Ender, how much of this game did you watch?
I caught the last 20 minutes.
It was a funny watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. But
However, Alwyn Jones did leave the stadium spotless after he was sort of picking up everything afterwards. So.
Hashtag rugby values.
Hashtag rugby values. He also did bring a distinct amount of Welshness to the line out. The line out for Bordeaux, for Toulon, could not catch a cold in the first half, and then he went off at half time, and then it worked after that. So, I wouldn't say that to his face. What else happened? Racing hammered Perpignan. Perpignan not looking good. They're taking some heavy scores, and Clermont beat La Rochelle 11 points to 10 in a thriller of a game. And you noticed something a bit funny on the sidelines of this one, Ender.
yeah, I'm sure we've
your
all
old
seen
mate
those
Rog.
clips of Raj getting pushed and not reacting, which I was very surprised by. I believe it was Benjamin Urdapaleta. I think he is an Argentinian 10. Kind of gave him an initial nudge and then went in again. And Raj, didn't react, which is good to see because he's gotten a few bans. He got a few bans last season, so good to see him not react like that. But what a cracking game, 11-10, I think it ended, wasn't that right?
Yeah, so top 14. So top 14. What about any NPC, mate? Did you catch any NPC this week?
Yeah, what I did see is that there's been a report from NZR saying that they're questioning whether the NPC is sustainable, like our 14 teams too many. But we also heard this week, didn't we, that the New Zealand Rugby Union isn't fit for purpose. So yeah, I love the NPC. Like, it doesn't get much traction at all. Whenever I tweet about it, very few people seem to be interested. Very few people, I think, even know what's on. But yeah, it's a great tournament. But yeah, it's crazy that there are 14 teams plus you've got all the it's just to me it's a brilliant tournament. It needs definitely more marketing. But it's kind of sad to see it, the whole question around its sustainability come into focus when we should just be concentrating on the rugbies and on the teams and on the results from the weekend. But looking at that tournament as a whole, Wellington are still on top. They're 3 points ahead of Taranaki, who lost by 1 point to Canterbury, and Southland are unfortunately still winless and lie at the bottom of the table. Hugh, did you get a chance to watch any Scottish Super Not Six?
No, sadly, I was dragged into watching some other rugby, and very unlike me, I was out socialising with other human beings rather than watching rugby, which I promise not to do again. I promise not to do again after the hangover it got me. Anyway, so Ayrshire are still top. They beat the Future 40 points to 0. Future not going very well. Unfortunately, the new team, the young team, taking a lot of heavy defeats. And Heriots beat Watsonians 64-0. Bit of a shock there. I don't know if there was a red card or some kind of controversy happened in that game, but Watsonians are normally quite up there. So to see them take it, Heriots have been good this season, but 64-0 is a lot. But out of that league, the top 4 teams get into the semi-final playoffs, and it's still all to play for. Only the Future can't mathematically qualify for the playoffs. What about any Interpros, mate? Was the women's Interpros final this weekend?
Yeah, so Leinster came out on top. Didn't get a chance to watch the game because I was also out on Saturday. But yeah, which is, I think, a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. A lot of people fancied Munster to win that. So yeah, fair play to Leinster for winning that one. And
then one for you, Nye. So the Welsh Premiership was back at the weekend, and your old club Newport beat Pooler in the Gwent Derby. Excited about that?
And it was, and again, Rodney Parade's been that home ground sort of Newport has been to the mix. They've had to share it for the past few seasons with sort of a football club plus the Dragons, and it's sort of been hectic. But local derbies are always the best, and I think sort of Pontypool used to be one of the best clubs. I think the Pooler front row for the British Lions was so famous, and a club. And I think really one of the clubs that suffered when we went down to the district side and the Dragons and Blues, Pontypool was one of the clubs I think suffered. So it's really nice to see him sort of in the Welsh Prem, and it's really nice to see him sort of getting back. But as a Newport boy, it is always nice to sit and have a nice little win over the Pooler Park lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great game. So for people who don't know, it wasn't very well publicised. Ender, bless him, tried to tell as many people as possible on Twitter. It is on S4C, which you can get if you're in the UK through iPlayer if you're not in Wales. It's also available on YouTube as well. Is that right, Ender? Yeah, it was available in Ireland. I did tune in for a while, so thankfully it's not geo-blocked with English commentary as well. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Oh, really? Okay. My girlfriend's learning to speak Welsh, so sometimes I like putting S4C on to help her out a bit. But fantastic. It was a great game. A really exciting watch. It was a high scorer. 2 great kits as well, Pooler and Newport. I love Newport's black and amber colour scheme. And then last game that we'll talk about is in the West Wales Derby in the Premiership. Llandovery sit top after they thumped Carmarthen Quins 54-31 at Quins, but Quins scored 2 very late tries to make that scoreline a bit more respectable. It was a bit of a one-sided affair. So that's the end of the rugby results. And do we need to cover the rugby broadcasting schedule for the next weekend, or is everyone pretty aware of what rugby's going to be on and where it can be watched? Yeah, I don't think we need to go through it this week, and I think people are probably familiar. But just as a reminder to everyone, so our UK-based fans, ITV are going to be showing the games, plus F4C in Wales are going to be showing Wales v Fiji. Irish fans will have to swap between RTE2 and Virgin Media, but again, everything is on free to air this weekend in our part of the world. So
And that's great to see. There is some NPC action on. There is the Premiership Rugby Cup actually starts as well, but they'll all be in the guide on Thursday. But everyone's going to be watching the World Cup, so like we need to go through all of those. But yeah, the guide will be out Thursday as usual, and you can all check out what times the kickoffs are on and everything.
Yeah, Chris, that's a bit weird, isn't it? The Premiership Rugby Cup playing at the same time as the World Cup. Is it just rugby being a bit insular?
It's very unlike them. They're usually so good at scheduling these things. But yeah, it is a bit odd. I mean, to be fair, it's a bit of an odd tournament in how it's actually viewed and how you can watch it and how easy it is. There's been some matches this weekend in terms of preseason games for the big Premiership team as well, but they're not really good at getting them out there. And like you say, everyone's going to be watching that World Cup anyway. I mean, I'm like a diehard rugby fan, and I'll be driving down to Marseille, so fortunate for me, but I'll catch the highlights.
Yeah. Should also say that Northampton Saints took a bit of a bashing off the Barbarians this weekend. So we'll put that down to being rusty coming off the summer, shall we, Saints fans? Right, so that brings us to the end of the pod, guys. It's been great fun. I've loved every minute of this. Chris, where can people find Dream Team Rugby if they want to get into what you guys are offering?
Also, all social media channels at Dream Team Rugby on Twitter is probably our kind of most popular one, where I spend most of my time talking. But there's also the Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and our website as well. So dreamteamrugby.com, and we'll keep you updated. We do a weekly blog once a week as a minimum. We'll update you with just some general musings that we may have, and also where we are with the blog and where we are with the actual fantasy game.
Cool, great stuff. Right, thank you everybody for joining in. Hope you enjoyed the show. Drop us a follow on Twitter or subscribe to the channel if you're new, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Massive thanks, Chris and Knight.
Sounds good.
Thank you for having us.